So what truly is nuclear warfare? I like to break down the words, and if you watch any of my videos, you're going to see that I do this quite a bit. It's kind of a little habit that I picked up from medical anatomy, physiology, and also, I guess, basic English class, where you take the roots of the words and you look at the makeup of the word itself, and in a lot of ways you're able to kind of gain much more of a definition than just looking at a raw definition. So I'm going to kind of break down the word nuclear, and I'm going to break it into two parts. I'm going to say new and the word clear. So a nuclear. Now, what is, by, I guess, scientific terms and not a philosophical sense, a nuclear reaction? Well, from what I learned in my physics class, and I'm surprised that my teacher actually taught us all this, but she literally took us step by step about, the particle decay and the actual reaction that occurs at an atomic level to pretty much make our own nuclear weapons. And what is actually going on here is you're causing a chain reaction event where, you have nuclear fission and nuclear fusion, and it has to deal with either fusing atomic particulates together or splitting them apart. And what happens is if you cause this reaction, then it actually starts a chain reaction. And that's where we actually have, the nuclear reaction itself. And, we have different, I guess, types of reactions within this category itself, where, nuclear reactors are pretty much just really advanced steam engines where, they produce tons and tons of heat through their core reactors. And then what's actually going to occur is the core itself superheats water, and then this steam turns turbines, which, if you turn a magnetic coil around magnets, then you generate an electrical current. And so they're utilizing the heat generated from this reaction to actually create steam. Well, what I'm going to get into is the splitting apart of atomic particulates in the sense that it is utilized for warfare. And now that we have somewhat of a pretty generic, I didn't necessarily get into extreme detail about it, but we're going to go the philosophical route now. And I'm going to show you exactly how it is that nuclear warfare is pretty much an everyday occurrence. And you yourself can be somewhat of a nuclear warhead. So breaking down the word like we did before is really going to allow us to see nuclear warfare at its finest. So what did I say before? I said a nuclear. Now, what is it that a nuclear explosion actually does? Well, it causes the most minuscule reaction upon the fabric of reality as we know it. Literally, we're diving so deep into the makeup of reality that we are actually causing rapid and changes on such a minuscule scale, and it causes this chain reaction over a massive area, and it pretty much destroys everything in its path. So history itself is wiped out from the area, allowing us to create a new clear, meaning that now that what was once there is gone, we're able to, in a sense, create a new pathway for things to go, because, history itself is actually the remnants of information stored and housed within objects, whether this object be our mental and physical pathway, which is created through our brain, or literally the historical sense of physical material within the world, which houses, all the reactions which have occurred over time to give us history. So what a nuclear explosion does is it pretty much wipes this all out, and in a sense gives us like a clean slate to work with. It kind of whitewashes the area, so to speak. And so, what you're doing is you're actually going to an area and you're not allowing anything of that area to enter into your space. So to do that, you pretty much have to be atomic. you have to be the most minuscule particulate that you can be, because, you know, I'm going to use an example here, like the nuclear bombs which were used over, you know, Hiroshima. Well, there's a disagreement there. There's a disagreement between two factions, and pretty much an opinion or a difference in ideals upon how the world should be ran or functioned. And so when you actually go to the ground zero area of a place that you're attacking, you have to block all attempts of the adversary to gain access into your space. Because if their ideas influence my nature and my cause, then in a sense, they have actually initiated nuclear warfare on me, because they're changing my viewpoint on things. So literally you have to become so minute and minuscule that you're atomic. You can't necessarily let in anything from your adversary into your space or enter into you, because it might, in a sense, change your viewpoints, and then they've won the war because they've made it so that you see the way that they see things. So now what we have is, when a nuclear explosion actually occurs, we have fallout and we have radiation. And this radiation is extremely toxic, and it's because we've changed the environment so rapidly, and, you know, so dramatic has been this change in such a minuscule amount of time that it has caused pretty much just overwhelming death. And with this overwhelming amount of death, we still have remnants of the past. Even though we've obliterated all sense of history in both scientific and philosophical terms of this region, because literally we've disintegrated it, we still have this radioactive decay of remnants of what was once there. And so before we can begin building our new clear in the area, then we have to wait for this radiation to actually become, you know, something of the distant past, which no longer is the forefront of our minds, not necessarily allowing us to move forward. So now, if we look at nuclear warfare in this sense, then pretty much the one with the greatest ability to cause change on a massive scale is literally the one with the most nuclear power on the face of the planet. He with the most listeners that can literally change the viewpoint of the world is the one which can cause it to have nuclears, as they themselves are very singular, almost like a singularity, atomic in nature, not necessarily allowing influence from outside to affect them from within. But as they travel through space, they're so minuscule and minute that nothing itself can actually gain entrance into their being. And so as they're traveling through reality, they themselves are literally the most minute fabric of reality. And on this level, literally the most minute of actions can have severe repercussions and very massive reactions in terms of all the other individuals and singularities around you, causing a chain reaction event to actually occur and take place, which is in itself a nuclear explosion, changing the world in a rapid manner from what it once was to what it now is. And in doing so, we find ourselves on a battle of ideals, on a battle of conservation and innovation, where if we actually have too much of any one, we actually don't have either. And what I mean by that is that if we're so innovative that literally we're not necessarily staying in one place ever, then there really is no innovation, because how can we innovate upon literally nothing that is stagnant? But if we ourselves are so conservative that we don't necessarily move our location at all, then how can we conserve anything? Because nothing really is ever changing, so how can there even be an ideal of conservation? And so just like with most things, we see that even nuclear war has a tug-of-war effect going on between changing the world and keeping it the way it once was, where there's always radioactive remnants of the past influencing the moment with the idea to want to rapidly change and progress with what our foresight sees to be possible. But if we don't, tread lightly, then what we're going to find is that we literally find ourselves in a space where we don't benefit from having either side. And this kind of leads me to another notion where, I talk a lot about if you go too far one direction, you're actually going to end up on the other side. A lot of people like to, say, hey, I'm Democrat or I'm Republican or whatever, but what they don't realize is that if I walk west far enough on the face of the planet, eventually I'm going to end up in the east. And eventually, if I walk west far enough, I'm going to end up back to where it was that I started. And so, it's like with this whole communistic or socialistic or a Republican or Democratic system battling itself, where what people don't realize is that the extreme of one side actually becomes the extreme of the other side. I mean, we can talk about some sense of like communism where, all assets themselves are turned over to the community and to the organizations or government entities, looking at it in a socialistic manner, where the overturn of the excess resources from the previous generation is actually, spread and dispersed throughout the government entities present. Well, what's kind of ironic about this is that if you look at a capitalistic society where people are so against such notions as the far left, they believe themselves to be far right. Well, what we end up seeing is that it's kind of funny because the wealth and the resources, instead of being passed on to government agencies after the previous generation becomes exhausted, it's passed on to multinational corporations. But the ironic thing is that a corporation is actually a government entity in disguise. What people don't realize is that an acting government is no different than an acting superpower as a company or a corporation. They're literally the exact same thing. It's just you're calling one a corporation, you're calling one a government. A corporation has a manifest. It has its own constitution, people. It has its own, code of ethics. Literally distinguishing itself in no way from what we would call a form of government. And that's why in today's world, the shadow governments aren't all of these different countries that you see on the maps. No, they're actually international businesses which are acting shadow governments. Literally, the extreme right has become the extreme left, where the assets are then passed over to these multinational corporations, which then distribute the goods throughout the world, which is just a government in disguise. And so it's kind of ironic because the system attacks itself in like a way to draw attention away from the fact that it is this. Because, if you draw attention to it, then people freak out about it. But if the system kind of every once in a while attacks itself, it's almost like a self-defense mechanism to keep itself in check, so to speak. Well, anyways, that's as far as I'm going to go on today's discussion into the random chaotic nature of all that is, because I don't really know where it is I'm going to go in these videos. I just kind of go, and wherever I end up is where I'm at. So thanks for joining me on this episode of Euphoric Intentions. I can't wait to take you on a little journey with me next time. Later, folks. Reality is such a fragile thing, but at the same time, Look how resilient it is. Nothing even broke.